Okay, hello. Thanks to everyone for turning out on Zoom this evening to celebrate the launch of Monk in the Marketplace. Here's a copy, Ray's remarkable autobiography. As I said, my name is Will. I'm representing Darton, Lomond and Todd, aka DLT Books this evening, and we're the publisher of Ray's book. The format will be as follows tonight. I'll do a short introduction, placing Ray's book in the context of what DLT publishes. Then, as I said a few moments ago, Hannah, who's been running the PR for the book, will interview Ray, and at the end there'll be the chance to put your own questions to Ray, and you can do that using the chat function on your Zoom screens. As I mentioned to some of the people I let in from the start, who were a few house rules. Firstly, just please keep your audio muted throughout if you can, and as said, to communicate you can use the chat function. The event is being recorded, so if you don't want it to be filmed, please switch off your camera now, because the event will be published on YouTube. And thirdly, if you'd like to ask a question of Ray, as I said, use the chat function, and I'll send them to Hannah, who will then put them to Ray at the end. And I'll be monitoring the chat throughout, so I'll pick up anything you guys post in there, and it will get seen and read at the end. So, without further ado, Ray's book, Monk in the Marketplace and The Simpsons. It's available now in paperback from all good bookstores, and also as an ebook, if that's your preference. As many of you know, Ray has led a remarkable life. He is one of the leading figures in, if not the leading figure in, Celtic New Monasticism. He's a lecturer, consultant, a liturgist, and also the author of over 40 books, of which this is the latest. He's also the founding guardian of the community of Aidan and Hilda, which provides a programme of retreats and events in the UK and beyond, taking lessons learned from Celtic Church in Britain and applying them for our lives today. And to boot, Ray is the founder of the Celtic Christianity Library and Open Gate Retreat House on the Holy Island of Lindisfarne. At DLT, Darton, Lomond and Todd, the publisher, we publish a range of topics. In the main, our publishing focuses on theology, often aimed at sort of the armchair reader, and also accessible spirituality for people committed in their faith, but also seekers as well. Over the years, we've published many theological and spiritual writers from the Catholic and Anglican traditions, including Pope Francis, Cardinal Basil Hume, Henry Nouwen, Thomas Merton, Rowan Williams, and Michael Main. But Ray's book is fairly unique on our list. His story demonstrates a unique monastic awakening, prophetic encounters and divine callings. The book offers a fresh angle on pilgrimage, and it carries some of the seeds of the future in how we think about spirituality now and in the years to come. As well as this, Monk in the Marketplace enshrines decades of wisdom and is full of plenty of fascinating anecdotes from Ray's rich and varied life experience. And if you haven't delved into the pages already, it makes for a very rewarding read. And as I said, it's available in paperback now, and also as an ebook, and you can buy copies from Ray himself, and I will be posting how to do that in the chat as we go along today. But that's quite enough for me, and I'm sure you'll be wanting to hear from Ray himself. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Hannah and Ray.
Thank you very much, Will, for that fantastic introduction. And I'm sure, Ray, you're looking at all these wonderful faces that have joined us, and you probably recognise most of them, I imagine. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this evening. As Will said, my name's Hannah, and I'm going to interview Ray this evening about his remarkable memoir. So, Ray, we will make a start. So my first question really takes us to the very start of the book, because your memoir kind of opens with this remarkable journey. It starts with your rather humble beginnings in World War II Britain and your childhood then. And you kind of open the book with your earliest memories of your family life, and I wondered if you wouldn't mind just kind of briefly giving us a picture of that kind of earliest time, and the opening chapter of your book and your kind of childhood family life for us.
Well, thank you, and it's lovely to see so many from my Simpson family, community of Aidan and Hilda family, Bowthorpe family, and others. I was born 3 months before Hitler declared war and started bombing London, where my parents lived. And I suppose most people in the human race have lived, very few people have lived between wars. The great majority of human beings have suffered in wars or refugees or whatever. So I am a very, very fortunate and blessed person. However, the war memory was pretty awful. The cantankerous Grandad Simpson had to be put in with equable mother's parents who they didn't get on at all in a small house. And that's the last thing they wanted was a baby. And so I was squashed into a tiny room. It was a blackout. So all I remember is a little nightlight, and I was terrified when that went out. We were in pitch dark in a tiny space. The only thing I remember of the food was dried egg powder and dried bananas. And I remember it was 1951, when I was 11, that the first sweet shop opened. And this was like a new world, a change of civilization, something absolutely unbelievably wonderful, the first sweet shop. Does that answer your question?
And could you maybe just elaborate a little bit more on the family situation with your parents? Because you mentioned that your grandparents moved in, didn't they?
Yes.
During those, yes.
Well, it was very, very overcrowded. And my dad had quite a senior job as an accountant with a big publishing firm, so he wasn't asked to serve in the army. He served in the Dad's Army, the Home Guard, as they called it. And that meant that he was on home duty every weekend. So I didn't see my dad. He was very tense and it wasn't really present to me. So I suppose this began a desire in me to go back into my mother's womb, because the first 3 months were rather nice. After that, it was hell, as I learnt when I did a primal therapy week with Dr. Frank Lake 3 decades later. The first 3 months in the womb were paradise, and the next 3 months were hell on earth. So unconsciously, a desire grew in me to go back into a safe, warm womb. And I wasn't truly myself. And it was only after this primal therapy week, 3 decades later, that I shouted at the top of my voice, "Do your worst, Mr. Hitler. I'm glad I'm being born and coming into this world." So it took 30 years to make up for the bad wartime birth and childhood.
Fantastic. I think we had a message actually from Tom Simpson. I was going to mention that. I don't know what relation. I assume he's part of the family.
Tom is Tom on oil rig, Kenny, and all the football are here in Cork, in Ireland, and it's lovely to see them. And is Tom on the oil rig, or is he here?
I think he is. I think that's what the comment said, actually. Is that right?
Right.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Tom is my brother's son.
Ah, okay.
And you read all about them in Ireland. There's a whole lot about Ireland, which is a country I've fallen in love with. Yeah. And Kenny, who's here, has done poetry for Black History Week, which you can get online.
Oh, fantastic. And it wasn't until I understand, still in your childhood, but it wasn't until you were kind of old enough to be in the Scouts that you had your very first experience of God. And I wondered if you could maybe just talk about that particular moment that you mentioned in the book?
Yes, I think I was 12 or 13, and I read I was a patrol leader in the Scouts and read a cub prayer instead of a Scout prayer and apologised. And the assistant Scoutmaster, Barney, he said, well, do you know what prayer is really about? He said, if you want to come for a cycle ride with me, I'll explain it to you. So he took me for a cycle ride, took me to a river, and he said, if you fall in that river, where will you go? And I said, I'd be dead. And he said, you'll go to hell. And I said, oh dear. And he said, but if you don't want to go to hell, you can ask Jesus into your life and he will save you from hell. And you can either do it by going to that tree over there and asking him in yourself, or you can ask me to pray on your behalf. I chose the tree, and I asked Jesus into my life. Now, cynics might say I haven't the faintest idea what I was doing. It was for all the wrong motives. However, I would say that from that moment, for the rest of my life, I had a sense that Jesus was following me. Maybe I'd only asked him into the front door of, if my life was like a house, the bedroom door and the kitchen and a lot of other doors were still closed, but I'd let him into the front door, and ever after I felt he was following me. And that's been a part of my whole life experience.
Lovely. I love that analogy as well about letting him into your house. And how some of those doors at that stage you know were still kind of closed, but obviously now
I'm not suggesting this is the most ideal way of evangelizing the world. I am simply reporting my experience, honestly.
So in the book, obviously, Will kind of touched on the fact that you really have had a remarkable life and a kind of a journey to where you kind of ended up in Lindisfarne. And you describe in the book your kind of very first challenging roles, and they were challenging roles, both in the industrial heartlands of England, the pottery, Stoke-on-Trent, in a multiracial London, kind of South London, Tooting area, with the Bible Society. And I wondered if you could kind of, again, just outline how you came to move to each location, and how you immersed yourself in each community, how you found each community. So the challenges you faced, the kinship you experienced, because it was all, happening in those communities. And how did that kind of early part of your journey influence your overall story and where you ended up?
Well, the key to all those assignments was discovering the art of listening to God in the first place, and much later with difficulty to other people. I describe how before I went to theological college, I joined a tin tabernacle run by a church army captain where almost everybody was in trouble with the police. The only family that weren't, a respectable family, were Jim and Hilda Ridges, who were in moral rearmament. They had an hour's quiet time every morning, and they wrote down their thoughts in a notebook, and any thought that was absolutely honest, pure, unselfish and loving, they thought might be from God, and so they considered it carefully. Well, they invited me to call in at the moral rearmament bookshop, and I delayed it and delayed, so I went on my way to college. And there I did, then I went to an international conference centre of moral rearmament with people from different nationalities, three continents, and that's where I got a sense of sin, not just for myself, but for my country. That's where the Chinese said, please forgive me for hating you British because you ruined our country through the opium trade. I had no idea of anything like that. It was a new world. And I began to have a sense of sin about all the evils countries have done, including my own, but also of the love of countries came into my heart. So I began the idea, the practice, the experiment of listening. Well, one person so after I'd done my theological college, you have to find a parish where you're a curate in the Church of England or a pastoral minister in other churches. And one of here in Staffordshire, in Stoke-on-Trent, which was the Brexit capital of Britain. And when I was there, there were only two professional people in the whole church, quite a number had never been to London, let alone to Brussels. And the vicar there, or the rector there, wanted a curate who listened to God. He wasn't, in modern terms, he wouldn't have been given much high marks for learning how to train curates. So I arrived, he didn't tell me what my duties were and then tell me how to do them. And I got very frustrated. And one day he said, I want you to make your own assessment of the situation under God and do something about it. He said, if you feel something, do something. And that was worth all the well-trained training rectors, far more. And so I began to listen to God. And one of the things I did was to ask if I could teach one day a week in the local building college, where the students they're only interested in motorbike, sex and football. And once you'd exhausted those three subjects, it was quite difficult to find a subject to grab their attention. However, the president of students, who was an atheist, came with me to see a Christian musical and began the experiment of listening to his conscience. He agreed to listen to his conscience, even though he didn't believe in God. And he was so amazed that there must have been an intelligence, not just conscience, conditioned by society, but a greater intelligence, that he came to believe in God. So, and while I was there, I was chairman of the Bible Society organization, and we raised enough money to send 2,000 Bibles to the Kalenjin-speaking nomads of Kenya. That was significant because after my 3 years was up, I had to do another curacy, and somebody in London who also had got this touch with this listening to God business, but he was a much more high church Catholic sort of person, complete opposite in style. He asked me to come. However, it was the beginning of the Windrush generation, and he wanted somebody, it's the first time they'd had a curate, to minister to all the incoming people from Windrush. But the wealthy white people who paid my salary, some of them were frankly racists. Not all, of course, but others just a bit sniffy or suspicious or wanting to keep things as they were always been, conservative, if you like. So it was, when I arrived, the two wardens came to see me and said, the best thing you can do is to leave as soon as you can, which was not an entirely welcoming beginning. But, and my poor vicar became ill with all this stress. It was when Enoch Powell made an infamous speech about rivers of blood flowing, which undid 2 years' work in a day in race relations developments. It was awful. But anyway, I wrote to the local paper because there was a black candidate for standing as MP, and he had vitriolic mail, and I wrote "Black is beautiful," and I then discovered what vitriolic hate mail was. It was absolutely awful. It nearly killed me. It was so horrible, and it taught me a lesson. And anyway, my vicar became ill, so I had to run the parish, even though I was only curate. But he still listened to God, and he had the thought, build the peace of the world in the streets of London. And that gave us a strategy to cope with all this difficulty. It was difficulty, but it was also a wonderful privilege of so many wonderful new people coming in. And I rang up the editor of our local paper, the Tooting and Balham Gazette, because an American doing a course on writing said, you've got to have a great idea, and then you ring your local newspaper editor and invite him out to lunch and tell him the great idea. So I rang the local newspaper and I got a secretary, and he didn't want to come to lunch, but they did take up my great idea, which was to write a column in the Tooting and Balham Gazette called Gold Digger. The Tooting and Balham Gazette then was full of women's institutes and all the old institutions of the old Tooting, which was nearly all white. But it had very, very little about the vast new Windrush generation. But I was visiting people who lived in single rooms, students and new workers on the underground and so on, and they were like gold. So can I do a column called Gold Digger? because every time I visit somebody, there's gold. But nobody else knows they're here in Tooting. So I want to let Tooting know there's gold in our midst. And until I left that parish, I did the gold digger column. So was that the assignments you wanted me to cover?
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's fantastic. And yeah, you painted a perfect picture of the descriptions you give in the book, because you get a real sense of the challenges that you face, and they were enormous, as you kind of elaborated there. But also just the sense of the community and all these wonderful people coming in, and you were very inviting and encouraging them to join in that community. And I wonder, because then in the book and in your own journey, you move on to Bowthorpe in Norfolk, which posed different challenges, I would say. And again, I wondered if you could just talk through how you initially ended up over in Norfolk, and how you would describe the mission that you had there. And I also wondered, have you returned since? Have you been there recently?
Well, I would have done if it hadn't been for COVID, but my sister rang me. I don't know if she's here. I can't see her. But anyway, she rang me the other day and said the current minister of Bowthorpe, who's United Reform minister, held the book up to a church meeting and said some very nice affirming things about
excellent
how God had worked when it began. And the thing is, I worked for the Bible Society. I went to see the Bishop of Kingston, who was going to give me a parish in London. But a few days before I went to see him, the Bible Society guy rang me and said, I want you to apply for a post in East Anglia. And I said, oh, I don't want that sort of post. I'm called to ministry, not fundraising. He said, oh, it's all changed now. The Bible Society wants to reach the subcultures of Britain, and you'd be involved with hospitals, prisons, schools, and shops, as well as raising money and action groups. So I said, oh, well, so I took the job. I was offered the job and took it. So I went to East Anglia with the Bible Society. Now, sometime after that, town planning experts told Norwich City, which was once the second largest city in Britain, by the way, you've either got to expand or decline as a city. You need a major new development, otherwise you'll start declining. But because all the post-war housing estates hadn't worked, because they built loads of houses and then problems had arisen, and then they reacted to problems by putting in this facility or that facility. But it wasn't holistic from the beginning. It didn't have what you need for the well-being of a community. And Norwich City Council, almost uniquely, well, for that scale, agreed to build 3 linked urban villages which had all that you need for well-being. Now, Prince Charles wrote a book about this, and we got 8 out of 10 for his marks of what you need for well-being. So Bowthorpe was built. You'd have people from 4 out of the 5 socioeconomic groups, ecological, friendly, car-reduced, handicapped people, old people, young people, students, all intermingling, private and council housing. And the council housing was sometimes better architecture than the private. It was quite remarkable. Anyway, they wanted the council wanted one space for one church. And so the church leaders invited me, because I'd worked with the Bible Society with all the churches and chapels and so on, to come for interview. And I came for interview and I said I would accept. But then the Free Church reps rang me up and said, it's not you we've got a problem with, it's the system. It's too much like an Anglican takeover. So I declined. I said, no, I can't accept. Which gave what David Edwards, who was then Dean of Norwich, said it was a divine accident. A divine accident happened. The bishop allowed me to get in touch with all ecumenical projects all over Britain and to draw up proposals for 2 years as an experiment. So we had the equivalent of a Baptist annual meeting, of a United Reformed Elders we called Leaders meeting, legal fiction that the Anglicans on it were a parochial church, all that sort of stuff. It's a bit complicated, but it worked. I was commissioned by 6 denominations, including the Roman Catholics and the Quakers, with the Pentecostals giving the right hand of fellowship and the Salvation Army band playing. I was commissioned to establish one family of Christians in one neighbourhood. Now, if it had happened 2 years later, the new church leadership wouldn't have agreed to it. And that's why it was called a divine accident. Now, it could have been absolute chaos, and it probably was for a time. But the book explains how it developed, and we based a lot of it on the World Council of Churches document, Baptism, Eucharist and Ministry, which is ahead of its time. So we had a wonderful baptistry in which people were baptized by immersion. And if a mother wanted her baby to come down into the pool, it would be sprinkled from the pool. Or people could be baptized by sprinkling if they chose. They had the option. And if people didn't think much of their original baby baptism, we honoured it. But we offered them renewal of baptism by being immersed in the water. The very first baptism, the Anglican architect had got his measurements wrong. It was a very, very big baptistry, too big, and it cost a fortune to heat. And the first baptism, the heating didn't work, so it was freezing cold. So I gave the 3 people a chance to say no. And the first sound from our baptistry was a teenage girl screaming at the top of her voice as she went into the water. So we got off to a rather extremely interesting start. But actually, that chapter is very important because it is a unique experiment, and I think it's probably 50 years ahead of its time.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. And so I'm absolutely thrilled both that Sister Sally has stayed on in Bowthorpe and is at the heart of it all, and that my friend, the present minister, Mark, feels that in order to know what God is saying to you now to a church, you need to know what he said at the founding, and how. So you're getting the integrity of the journey, and I appreciate that very much. So I go back to Bowthorpe occasionally, and the community of Aidan and Hilda has a group in the area, so I've been to see them until the lockdown.
And we're going to jump a little bit now to possibly my favourite parts of the book. Because I really, really love the story of the calling that you felt on that New Year's Eve in 1987. And again, I wonder if you could just recount that section for us all now.
We've no doubt got conservative socialists, Sinn Féin and all sorts of people here, I know, but all political parties. Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister in the middle of my time at Bowthorpe. And why do I say that? Well, she said there's no such thing as society. And I became aware that it was no earthly good us trying to build a village of God and a family of Christians that transformed a neighbourhood. It's like painting one cabin when the Titanic is sinking. And, if the whole country and the whole world is going down because it's just run by greed and no other values, we've got to think of the wider picture. So that came into my heart. And then I had a 3-month sabbatical and went on pilgrimage around the world, but ran out of money. And somebody said it's cheap on Holy Island, so I went there. I went back. I talked with the vicar there who once been a monk. He said, come. He wanted to put me off being romantic about Holy Island. So he said, come in the depth of winter when nobody goes to church and they're all drunk. So I did. I went for New Year's Eve. I stayed in a bed and breakfast and looked at the midnight TV message from the Archbishop of Canterbury, which was about the importance of cradle places in bringing faith to nations. And I turned the TV off and walked out to a little cowshed that had been turned into a prayer cell. This was after midnight. It was cold and dark. There was no artificial lighting in that part of Holy Island. And I knelt down on the ground and the earth shook. and my inside spun round uncontrollably, and I had an absolutely crystal clear, inaudible voice saying, I want cradle places that are more like Bethlehem's and Jerusalem's, more like this place of Lindisfarne represents, deeper in the soul of the people and the soil. And I want my people to reconnect with my presence in creation, in the people of all races who are outside the church, and in the unseen world of the saints and the angels. I want my people to get rid of the excess baggage they've carried and walk with space in their hearts for hospitality to others. Well, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I knew I could never be the same again. And I'd gone with a friend called Stuart Burns. He went back to resign from being a parish priest and became a member and later the abbot of the Benedictine monastery at Burford, which then went to Macknall Abbey. And I knew that I had to go back to Bowthorpe and realize that I've missed something out. We were making one family of Christians at Bowthorpe, but as denominational leaders replaced others, it seemed to me they wanted to carry on denominationalism. They wanted us to produce 10 good Anglicans or 10 good Baptists every year and fit into their structure and their mindset. And I said, well, these are different church streams. Was there ever a time when these streams flowed together like one river? And that led me to study the churches and Christianity when the gospel first came to the edges of the Roman Empire, to Ireland and to Britain. And I came to the conclusion that it was like a single river. And then I asked myself, has this river disappeared completely, never to be got in touch with again, or has it gone underground, in which case it can come up above ground again? And so that was the vision that had been at the back of my mind before and after the Lindisfarne experience.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'm sure most of the people that are here tonight are obviously aware of the community of Aidan and Hilda, but perhaps for those that are new to it, I wondered if you could just please tell us about the community and what it's like.
Yes, well, I shared these insights with a friend of mine called Michael Mitten, and a friend of his. He introduced me to his friend Russ Parker, who'd done great work with healing wounded memory in places as well as in people. And he believed that healing needed to take place not just in individuals, but we need to heal the land. So I met with 6 others, Michael's friends, and we became the 7 co-founders of what turned out to be the community of Aidan and Hilda. When we began, we just talked and shared, and then we came to the conviction that this Celtic insights had something for our time. We came to the conviction that we need to recover the lost art of listening to God and to others. We came to the conviction that a rule of life or a way of life was needed for ordinary people, not monks in monasteries, but for ordinary people in ordinary jobs. And then we came to the conviction that we should launch this, and then we had to find a name, and we called ourselves the Community of Aidan and Hilda. And we had a big conference at Sonic Conference Centre in the middle of England, and 27 people said they want to follow this way of life that we circulated there. And I was asked to supervise them and help them to explore the way of life. And then we drew up categories of explorers, people in first vows, people in life vows, and everybody has a soul friend, and that was a whole area of how you revitalize the whole soul friendship tradition and resource it. We have a pattern of prayer, so we began to publish rhythms of prayer for 4 times a day and for all the seasons of the year and the natural seasons. So, and many people began to say to us, this is what we've longed for all along. Why didn't the church tell us about it? that was a repeated statement from all sorts of people. It was as if the time has come. So we launched the community of Aidan and Hilda, and it's wonderful to have Simon, who's one of the present guardians, and I think I saw Penny here. I don't know if I haven't seen anybody else for the guardians, and there are people in the KM Council of the community. And obviously there's so much more can be said about that. And so many people are wanting to become explorers and learn about a way of life and learn about soul friends through our written material or courses online. Incidentally, you mentioned, well, in your introduction that we do retreats at the Open Gate. We don't have the Open Gate any longer, but we still do retreats. So that's that bit done, I think.
Thank you. And I'm aware as well, we want to leave enough time for questions that we've been receiving. So I've got a couple more questions to ask you. And I wanted really to just touch on the subtitle of the book and the Simpsons, because there is a lovely section in the book where you explore your family ancestry, and you actually discover possible links to King Edward VII. And you also talk about how your parents were writers. So I wondered if you could just talk a bit about that, and also, you know, what made you want to explore your family roots?
Well, Ancestry TV is all over the place. Everybody's into exploring their roots these days. And I think what made me really want to was Grandad Simpson was a skeleton in the cupboard. No, my dad would never ever talk about him. He was a very, very strong-minded man, but people were very frightened of him. So he went to Clacton-on-Sea to die, and he didn't die because it did him so much good. And so he wrote me a card saying, I can't afford to send you birthday presents any longer because I came here to die and now I'm so well I can't afford it. That was typical of the man. So everybody was terrified and nobody knew who his dad was, you see. And so I thought, look, there's a skeleton in our family cupboard. There's a no-go area. I want to look at this. And I think Cousin Jane is here and she may have a different story. And nephew Sam has different angles. However, my father and his sister and brother were told the father of my grandfather was a very important person who on no account must be named. So there was no name on the birth certificate, and we can't get anything from ancestry research. Well, and somebody else, another cousin said, oh, she was a dancer or an actress, and so on and so on and so on. Well, when my sister and I were watching photographs of the royal family on television and said, that's just exact like our dad. And I said, I wonder if the very important person who on no account must be named was the man who became Edward VII. So I got a biography of him. He's an absolutely awful man. He was low intelligent and totally promiscuous. And sure enough, he had a place in Berkeley Square and another place in London just at the time when the grandfather was born, where he had a different actress each night and cockfighting with the then Duke of Edinburgh. My sister told me, I shouldn't have said the Duke of Edinburgh. It wasn't the present, the one that's just died. It was the previous Duke of Edinburgh. Anyway, he must have had endless children by these actresses, all hushed up in an age of deference. So I feel that it's highly likely, but not absolutely certain, that he was my great-grandfather. And then I had lots of dreams, and I don't know if other people have them, so I could test this out. My recurring dream is that I'm in a royal palace, and the Queen or someone, Prince Charles, turns up. They say, what are you doing here? I say, well, this is my home. What are you doing here? So I don't know what a psychiatrist would make of that. But I do think that it doesn't really matter who our ancestors are actually, but it's useful to know because it helps in healing. And I think we're all children of royal, we're all royal children, King of Kings. And he was an awful man, but even he did one or two good things, which I explain in the book. So everybody can be redeemed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. And finally, this will be my final question before we open it up to audience questions. in the kind of final section of the book, you kind of discuss the future of new monasticism, and I'm going to quote what you write there. You put, "The model we need is a Celtic new monasticism which lets God be our inner compass so that we can navigate the third millennium seas." And you also write about how one reason Benedictinism survived 1,000 years, you say, is because Benedict wrote this commentary, 73 short chapters, and how you wanted to create a similar commentary to lay the foundations for the next 1,000 years. And you actually mentioned to me today that having read the book, Reverend Peter Nielsen had said how deeply moved he was by the book and how he could see the importance of a commentary and the implications. And I wondered if you could just talk about how you see the future, the next 1,000 years for new monasticism.
Well, I think new monasticism is not like the traditional Roman monasteries, where you're all celibate and you're all living in one building and you make obedience to one person. Power corrupts, and it has corrupted many Benedictine monasteries. What it is, it's more like the Desert Fathers and Mothers, which preceded that, where people in ordinary walks of life, who may be married in some cases and they may be in ordinary jobs in some cases, have a rule or a way of life which commits them to a rhythm of prayer, to the values based on the Beatitudes of Jesus, and to care for creation, to stand for justice, and to live to overcome evil with good. So we have 3 life-giving principles and 10 waymarks in our way of life. And we meet regularly with a soul friend to work through how we apply it in our lives. So it's too much to go into on this short occasion. But why I believe it can last for 1,000 years is because I think we're in the decline of what people call Christendom. Probably the Western nations are going to fade out. China now has its Belt Road through 70 countries, which is why an African country has left the Commonwealth in order to please China. And I think that so the Chinese believe in Tao, the way, which they say wisdom lies in aligning ourselves with the ultimate nature of the universe. And Muslims follow a way which is very similar to the way of the early Christians. It's just unfortunate that Muhammad, because Christianity became imperialistic and colonized, they made Christ like the top person on the head of a pyramid. In other words, like an emperor. And poor Muhammad thought that was absolutely awful and dreadful for God to have somebody like that. But so we don't want to go into theology, but I believe that the fivefold path of Muslims is a rebuke to Christians. And so I believe that the recovery of the Jesus movement as a way of life, which starts at the bottom and is available to everybody in all continents, that is the future. And I think that it can survive the collapse of Christendom and the collapse of the Western powers. That's my point. And so only 2 weeks ago, I hope it's not gone on the community website yet, but it no doubt will. I got somebody in Hong Kong, because it's perhaps the last opportunity for all we know, before they're not allowed to do this sort of thing, to translate our way of life into Chinese. And that's now available. And I hope that and it's available in Russian, it's available in one African language, and I hope it'll be available in many, many more. And so that people throughout the world can follow the way of Jesus in a post-colonial Christianity that respects the indigenous way, a Christianity that understands that planet Earth is dying because we've stopped stewarding the creation as the Creator wants us to do, and a tradition of Christianity which is creation-friendly. It's what the whole world needs.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I think we're going to have a look at some audience questions now. Are there any that have come in? Well, if I have a look in the chat, let's have a look at the top here. Let's go up. Lots of lovely messages. I think I did see a few questions come in. Oh, there's one here from David Cole, and it says, or Brother Cassian. I don't know if, Ray, do you know who that is?
Yes, David.
Fabulous.
David has taken the monk's habit within the community of Aidan and Hilda, and his monk's name is Brother Cassian.
Ah, lovely. So it says here, with all your wide-ranging experiences and learning through life, if you could tell your younger self one thing as advice for living, what would it be?
Oh, gosh. Don't give up. Don't commit suicide. Don't run away. Keep your heart open. God has a way of getting through to you, and you'll find the way.
Fantastic. Okay, and the next question that we've got here is from Steve Palmer, and it says, has Ray within his ministry ever had to deal with people who even in this day and age worship another god?
Hello, Steve. It's nice to see you from 40 years ago in Bowthorpe. Yes, I was on the phone to a pagan 2 days ago who's interested in Celtic spirituality, but find it very difficult to have a distinctive God, one God that you have to worship. So what the question is, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yes, of course. So within your ministry, have you ever had to deal with people who even in this day and age worship another God?
Yes, lots of people are pagans or Muslims. I spent a week in Birmingham at one of our community of Aidan and Hilda houses run by Joy and Jeff Holt, dialoguing with the 6 varieties of Muslim who were evangelizing in Birmingham Market Square. And it was a very interesting time. And I think that we've got a lot of things wrong in Christianity. And I think we need to say sorry for becoming imperialistic and for the world to think that Jesus is an imperialistic icon. And I think one of the questions somebody rang me the other day who goes with Indian gurus and pagan people today in London. He said, I like talking to you because you don't judge me. But I have explored with him this idea that if everybody is, if there's a cosmic oneness, he wants cosmic oneness, you see. And so any distinctions are the enemy of that, and Christianity makes distinctions. I said, well, forget about the distinctions, but if whatever you call God, the ultimate being, cosmic consciousness, whatever you want to call it, if you can have a personal relationship to that, is it not infinitely better than an impersonal relationship? That's the question I put to people of other religions. And if it is better, and just supposing the cosmic consciousness or Tao or the ultimate of the Buddhist being has come within, or the Muslims say one name of God is God the unknown, another name is God revealed. I say just supposing the God revealed has come within the human stream as well as being outside it. Is there anything more wonderful than that you can possibly conceive of? I mean, that's the way I go about it. So yes, I do know lots of people with other points of view.
Thank you. And the next question is from Sam Simpson, who says, for much of my life, I had a lingering suspicion, which has become a firm conviction, that the disintegration and collapse of Christendom is essential for the rebirth of true Christianity. Am I a heretic?
Can I call my nephew a heretic? What do you think I'm a heretic, Sam? That's a good question. But a heretic isn't quite the right word. No, I think You see, Brother Cassian pointed out that when Christian emperors portrayed Jesus as an equivalent to Zeus or these Greek gods, it was like a capitalist competition to have the top god, as it were. And I think that whole approach is utterly, utterly wrong. In a way, we ought to have a competition to the bottom. Who can have the lowest God, if you like? The God who is most vulnerable, most defensive, hasn't got all the power, and so on. So no, I don't think you're a heretic. But on the other hand, it's important to deeply listen to those who have acquired wisdom in the different faith traditions.
Thank you. Right, the next question is from Simon Anthony Holloway. And it says, Ray has travelled in mainly English-speaking countries and in the Scandinavian countries. How well is the community of Aidan and Hilda able to translate into an African culture?
Well, it's lovely to have Kemi here, whose mother and father are Nigerian. And it's a very important question. We have one or two people who follow the way of life in Africa, but I've just finished reading a book whose title I've forgotten, but it's about the black contemplatives. It's basically the Afro-American church, but going back to when they were slaves in Africa and then how they were carried over to America. And the terrible sobs, they sang their sobs on the boats as they came over. Some of them died while they were singing them. And it's pointing out that clapping and rhythm and breathing is all there in the African experience. So Western Christians say, oh, they're not contemplatives. They're all dancing and stuff. They are contemplatives. They have a wonderful sense of wonder and rhythm, which is terribly important for the world. And so yes, our way of life calls us to have unity and diversity and to value the riches. And it's one of my passions. We've just appointed, the community of Aidan Hill has just appointed one of our members to be in charge of, I've forgotten what it is, diversity, inclusion and ethnic variety or something. I've forgotten what all the things are. But to make sure that we are, and so it's, at the moment it's like a seed, but I believe that it's got to grow and grow and grow. Is that the answer to your question?
Simon, is he nodding?
Where's Simon? Can't see you.
No, I can see him on my, he must be on the next page, I think, right. But hopefully that answered his question.
Nice to see you, Simon, anyway. We can blog about it in the future. Simon does a very interesting blog.
Fantastic. Right, I think we have time for a couple more questions. So the next one is from Julie, and it says, Ray mentioned his love for Ireland. Do you expand on this in the book, or could you say a few words on that for us now?
Yes, why do I love Ireland? And my brother Tony, who's not able to be with us, he's not well enough, and he doesn't have a Zoom. We're very different in many ways, but he went to a Pentecostal institute in Sussex, and he married a Danish wife called Anita, and they were independently both called to Ireland. He read a book called Darkest Island, which in those days referred to the Roman Catholic Ireland. But since the Vatican Council, that's all changed, and they're very friendly with a lot of Catholics. But so they've been in Ireland all their life, over 50 years. But I went, so I'd been to them, and one of the things I liked about even Ireland before modernism came in was that all the coach drivers stopped at every shrine and knelt down and prayed. Now, that's people say that's superstitious, it's the old Ireland and that's gone. Okay, but the thing I liked about it was there was no gap between work and faith. Faith was in the workplace. It was holistic. And then I began to read about Celtic Christianity, and I realized that Ireland, after Armenia, was probably the first country in the world to become a land of saints and scholars. So that it, very, very early on, people fell in love with Christ, but because they were outside the Roman Empire, they didn't colonialize Jesus. It came along tribal lines, and they had these wonderful monastic villages of God, and they were intoxicated with God. They were athletes of the spirit, and they had the spiritual foster mother. So Ireland, I debate with my friend Ian Bradley, I don't know if he's here tonight, on this. I think that Ireland's spiritual foster mothers were distinctive and something very wonderful. So my imagination was captured by the early Christianity in Ireland. Now I know modern Ireland is in a war between, was in a war between Catholics and Protestants. Now that's out of date. We're in a new period now. But I love Ireland because I think that the British have been the most awful empire builders, but they've done some good also. But the very worst they've done is in Ireland. It's absolutely atrocious. And yet, Irish people open their hearts even to British people. They open their hearts to the world. They're very hospitable people. They've got a great sense of humour. And until the great flight from the Roman Catholic Church because of clerical abuse, which was in the last 10 years, they were very, very devout. And, well, endless arguments going on about Protestantism and so on. Of course, all my family are what Catholics call Protestants. But I love Ireland for that reason, and because, I don't know, it's a wonderful land. I realise it's got a whole lot of problems, and it's become quite secularised. But I think the flight, I met a taxi driver on my last but one visit, and he said, Ireland turned its back on Britain years ago, and now it's turned its back on the church. What are we going to do next? So part of my vision is to write, I finished it, but nobody's interested in it, and it needs, it's not, somebody said this is 30 years ahead of its time, reimagining Britain and Ireland. I think Britain's going to break up, and Ireland probably will become united in disunity, within the next 20 years or 30 years. But reimagining Britain and Ireland includes the vision that we can be lands of saints and scholars who have a fellowship in the gospel which transcends all the horrors of history. So I hope the Cork Examiner will publicise this biography.
Thank you very much. Right, I've just looked and I think I covered all the questions. I apologies if I missed one, but I think we have also reached our time limit as well. So that worked out quite well. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back over now to Will.
Could I just say thank you so much to all my friends who've come. I'm absolutely thrilled that you're here. And I see Cousin Jane over there. And everybody, yes, thank you so much. And we've got Stella from Ireland as well as all my relatives. Yeah. Sorry, Will.
No, that's fine. Just to say thank you all for coming, everyone. And Ray, that was fascinating. Great questions, and really interesting to hear you expand on what you've written in the book. The book is Monk in the Marketplace. It's available now. You can order copies from Ray. I put the details of how to do that in the chat. We can circulate how to how to do that as well to all the people that came as well. So you can do that tomorrow just in case you missed it. And thank you for coming, everyone. And a recording of this will go online tomorrow. So thank you so much, Ray, for your time. It was amazing. And also Hannah for hosting.
So, yeah, thank you, Ray.
Thank you.